Okay, both teams are dead. Do we just wait? This reminds me of the Steam summer sale. Onage. See, Dota Plus is worth the money. These things, they take time. Please email me at gaben@valvesoftware.com and let me know about your rampage. I'm not wearing underwear.
On the 3rd of November 1962, yes 3rd, despite how difficult that is to believe, a man was born who would change the world forever and would go on to be remembered by history. Most known as the man responsible for the Steam summer sale, Gabe Newell, or just Gaben for short. Gaben lived his early life in Seattle, Washington. Fitting, since Washington is known for being the state where most American game companies are based. Gaben was your typical nerd, a fan of games like Doom and Super Mario 64, both of which would inspire him later on in life. He got into Harvard but dropped out 3 years later to work for Microsoft, helping develop various Windows operating systems, and he became classified as a Microsoft millionaire. After 13 years of working for Microsoft, and after, in his own words, being a producer on the first 3 releases of Windows, Gaben left Microsoft to form the video games company Valve Software with fellow co-worker Mike Harrington, as they shared many common interests. They were inspired to do this by Michael Abrash, who also used to work at Microsoft but left to work on the game Quake at ID Software. Gaben saw video games as the future of the entertainment industry, as contrary to movies, players could interact and take part with the story and characters, and at times even make their own decisions on how the plot should progress. In 1998, Valve released their first game, Half-Life, a game heavily influenced by Doom and Stephen King's The Mist, and it was revolutionary for a multitude of reasons. The game was a first-person shooter, a genre arguably oversaturated nowadays, but the late 90s and early 2000s was the prime for these games, and Half-Life flourished. However, that's not to say it was popular simply because FPS games were popular at the time. Far from it, it was Half-Life that caused the influx of new players to FPS games. 2 extremely popular games, Counter-Strike and Day of Defeat, Counter-Strike being one of the most popular FPS games of all time, actually started as mods for Half-Life. Another reason Half-Life was so successful was because it was a true first-person experience. Despite the in-depth story, there is not a moment in the game, including cutscenes, where you are not in first person. The story progresses solely via the character's point of view. Every single event that occurs in the story is seen through the eyes of the player, bringing in a huge sense of immersion, never broken by seeing your character in the third person. The famous mute protagonist trope also originated from Half-Life, as Gaben felt it would be a bit weird to hear someone other than yourself talk as your character, which helps sell the idea that the story is about you. It really feels like you are in the game. Realism is another factor. Now I know it's a game about killing aliens, but that's not what I mean. Say for example you were low on ammo and needed to restock. Where would you look? Well, in most games, pretty much anywhere, but not in Half-Life. In Half-Life, you would only find ammo in a supply closet, and health regenerators in areas where something potentially dangerous could occur. The map layout and design also play into this. Most games around the time, no matter where they were set, would have a very similar map layout, designed to be optimal for FPS games. Instead, Half-Life's layout feels like you are in a scientific research center, and yet at the same time still manages to be a good FPS game, combining the location of the game with the FPS aspect masterfully. The game isn't just a shoot 'em up either, as there is a fair amount of exploring the Black Mesa Research Center. There is no minimap telling you where you are and where you need to go, as that wouldn't really make sense in real life. You have to figure out both of those for yourself, and the game really does feel like you're just a guy trying to survive. There isn't really a certain place you need to get to, but the game still manages to give you what is essentially a full-on tour of the facility. Just a side note, Half-Life's game engine was Gold Source, a modified version of the Quake game engine, made by Michael Abrash, who was the guy who inspired Gaben and Harrington to found Valve. Another thing, the story itself. Aliens attacking may seem like a cliche, but that's not what attracts players to the game's lore. This right here is the G-Man, whose name was only found by going into the game's files, G-Man being short for Government Man. His name was later confirmed by Valve. The G-Man is a character whom at the beginning of the story can be seen observing you from various different places, yet these places are miles apart at times, so it wouldn't make sense for him to just walk there. He's always just out of reach of the player, talking to people in the background or observing you kill aliens at the balcony of a room, but swiftly leaving after you spot him. After you kill the final boss, the G-Man talks to you, and you find out that he was the one who was keeping the portal open to let the aliens through in the first place. Not only that, but the G-Man's monologue is unnerving, especially the way he speaks, which can only be described as he's not used to having lungs.
I took the liberty of relieving you of your weapons. Most of them were government property. As for the suit, I think you've earned it.
He then mentions that his employers are impressed by your work.
I have recommended your services to my employers, and they have authorized me to offer you a job. They agree with me that you have limitless potential.
And offers you an ultimatum. Either you work for him and his employers, or you are offered a battle you cannot win. If you choose the latter, you are teleported into the middle of a herd of hostile aliens, and the screen goes black. However, if you choose to work for the G-Man, he puts you in stasis until you are next needed. The game essentially created its own theory base, where people discuss who the G-Man may be. And seen in Minecraft with Herobrine, this really helps the game become popular. And finally, the freedom the game gives you. Throughout the game, you will encounter various survivors hiding out, and you have the choice to either kill them or help them with whatever they are doing, or saving them if they are about to die. There are benefits to doing either. For example, if you save one guy from a zombie, it will give you tons of ammo and health packs. And none of this impacts the main story, so you could go around killing everyone you see, and the game would allow you to do so. You monster. And that was the cherry on the cake for Half-Life. But people wanted more, so in 1999, Valve released Half-Life Opposing Force, an expansion pack, DLCs weren't a thing then, for Half-Life. In Opposing Force, you play as Adrian Shepard, a US Marine sent to kill any witnesses to the alien attack. Once Adrian finds out what his real mission is, he rebels and tries to save some scientists. The army then decides to nuke Black Mesa, and Adrian eventually manages to defuse the nuke. But as soon as this happens and you try to escape, the G-Man reactivates the nuke and blows up Black Mesa. Adrian is then put in stasis. Why would the G-Man do this? We don't know, and that's the fun of it, the mystery. What we do know is that the nuke was detected by the Combine, a heavy militarized alien species that enslaves dozens of other alien species. Because of the nuclear explosion, the Combine conquer Earth, but the G-Man appears to dislike them and congratulates you when you kill them in the second game. So what are his true intentions? It doesn't make sense. This is one of the reasons the Half-Life 3 meme exists. People want to know what happened to Gordon and who the G-Man is. But I'll talk about that later. A year later, Mike Carrington left Valve to spend more time with his wife, so the company was now solely in the hands of Gabe. And on the 9th of November 2000, after hiring the guys who made the Counter-Strike mod for Half-Life, Valve released the first official Counter-Strike game, simply titled Counter-Strike. The fourth game in the series, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, would go on to be the best-selling PC game of all time, selling over 25 million copies on Steam. What's Steam, you ask? Steam is the most used video game platform on the internet, and was made by Valve. And although far from being the first, Steam would kickstart the decline of disc PC gaming and pave the way for digital game releases. Unless you're a console peasant. By around 2004, Valve had completed a new game engine, the Source Engine, a heavily modified version of the Gold Source Engine. It allowed for incredibly high graphics and at no performance cost. In fact, performance actually increased quite significantly despite the new and lifelike, for the time, graphics. Valve then decided to not only make all their upcoming games in the Source Engine, but re-release popular old games such as the original Half-Life in the Source Engine. And later that same year, Half-Life 2 was released, taking place 20 years after the events of the original Half-Life. It starts with a monologue from the G-Man, with a disturbing amount of weird visual effects and cuts. One notable thing about the G-Man in this game is that although with the incredibly improved graphics, all the characters look relatively realistic, the G-Man is noticeably uglier than any of the other human characters. And this is seemingly done on purpose, to promote the mystery around the character. Half-Life 2 was a masterpiece, just like its predecessor, and one of the main reasons was the introduction of the gravity gun, now an icon in the gaming community. Players could now essentially use the Force against their enemies, either hurling gas cans at them or just straight up yeeting them away. The mix of the gravity gun, the heavily improved graphics, and keeping the same permanent first-person principle as the first Half-Life game would lead to Half-Life 2 becoming one of the most influential games ever made. Valve saw episodic releases as the future of gaming, so in 2006 Half-Life 2 Episode 1 was released. It ran on the same source engine as its predecessor, and had no new features added to it, but was still a good game nonetheless. Episode 1 is generally regarded to be the worst of the main Half-Life games, not because it was bad, far from it, but because it wasn't revolutionary, which unfortunately for Valve was now expected. 2006 also saw the release of Garry's Mod, an open-world sandbox game using the same game mechanics as Half-Life 2, used to create everything from Five Nights at Freddy's maps to this.
You're a wizard, Harry.
I'm a what?
Then, in 2007, Valve released the Orange Box, a game bundle including both HL2 and HL2 Episode 1, while also containing 3 new releases: Portal, Team Fortress 2, and the final Half-Life episode, Episode 2. Portal was a first-person shooter, I guess technically, but it was first and foremost a puzzle game. You play as Shell, a test subject in the Aperture Science
Computer Aided Enrichment Center,
making your way through the progressively more complex test chambers. But things seem a little out of place. For example, the robot who talks to you throughout the game, guiding you and telling you what to do, starts progressively becoming more and more aggressive when she talks to you. And you start to notice that all the observation decks to the test chambers are empty. And the game doesn't treat you like an idiot and pretend like you wouldn't already notice these things. In Test Chamber 16, coincidentally the first test chamber where there is something actively trying to kill you, one of the panels on the wall is held open by a weighted storage cube, and when you go inside, you see what seems to be the warnings from someone hiding from GLaDOS, the robot. Most notably the cake is alive phrase. This refers to when in one of the later test chambers, GLaDOS mentions that when you complete all of them, there will be cake.
the Enrichment Center is committed to the well-being of all participants. Cake and grief counseling will be available at the conclusion of the test. Thank you for helping us help you help us all.
This quickly became one of the first memes, taking the internet by storm and bringing Portal with it to fame. Despite the warnings from Test Chamber 16, you have no choice but to follow GLaDOS' instructions, up until Test Chamber 19, when she tries to kill you. Using the skills you've learned in the test chambers, you escape, navigating your way through the rusty innards of Aperture Science until you reach GLaDOS herself, and kill her in a boss battle. What separated Portal from the average puzzle game was the subtle details left in to increase the immersion in the game. For example, the uneasiness felt throughout the game produced by the effective choice of using plain, clean white panels for the walls of the facility, covering up the maliciousness and nefarious origins of Aperture below the surface, and other subtle things, like for example in the boss battle with GLaDOS, she mentions this.
Are you trying to escape? Things have changed since the last time you left the building. What's going on out there will make you wish you were back in here. I have an infinite capacity for knowledge, and even I'm not sure what's going on outside. All I know is I'm the only thing standing between us and them.
This cemented Portal's place among the greats of Valve, as well as a chance for a sequel, but that happens later. For now... Team Fortress 2 was the sequel to the online FPS, originally Quake mod, Team Fortress Classic, but there are virtually no similarities. In fact, Team Fortress Classic might as well have been an alpha version for Counter-Strike, as they had much more in common with the grittiness and realism of the Counter-Strike games. Instead, Team Fortress 2 opted for cartoonish-style graphics and had a generally more kid-friendly theme to it, although do not for a moment think it was meant to appeal to kids, because that's not entirely accurate. The game originally shipped with just 3 game modes, but now has over a dozen, ranging from Capture the Flag to King of the Hill and Man vs. Machine. The F2 quickly became a certified classic for a multitude of reasons, such as the now common but then unheard of character class options to choose from when you join a game. There are 9 classes to choose from: Pyro, Engineer, Spy, Heavy, Sniper, Scout, Soldier, Demoman, and Medic. each class having its own advantages and disadvantages. For example, the Scout has the fastest movement speed, but suffers from low health and damage. This alone identified TF2 as a fresh view in the FPS genre, and combined with its unique art style, the game would go on to become yet another wildly successful Valve game. The game would become free to play in 2011, and as a way to make up for this lost revenue, Valve implemented a cosmetic system where you would either trade or use real money to buy in-game cosmetics. And if you bought the game when it originally came out, here's a hat. One more thing, the game took 9 years in development before it was released, bruh. And last but definitely not least, Half-Life 2 Episode 2. Episode 2 beautifully combines the flawless level design and never dull gameplay from Half-Life 2, and manages to keep you gripped to the story every step of the way. Although technically not being a new game, it took all the best parts from its prequels and amplified them. The engaging story ends on a dramatic cliffhanger, preluding to the event that has been hinted at throughout its two predecessors, that being the mysterious reappearance of the cargo ship Borealis, a ship created by Aperture Science, Black Mesa's rival company and the setting for the Portal games, designed to be able to teleport, which mysteriously went missing years ago. And when we were just about to find out how the story ends, nothing. Valve initially announced that Episode 3 would be released only a few years after Episode 2, but we gradually heard less and less from Valve about the finale to the series. Eventually, people assumed that Valve was working on a completely new game engine, the Source 2, to create the sequel on, and thus, instead of Half-Life 2 Episode 3, people started asking for Half-Life 3. And thus, the meme was born. For almost 13 years, no updates on any Half-Life releases were given. That was, up until 2020. But hold your horses, we're still in 2008. And what's this? A new Valve title? Whatever could it be? Left 4 Dead is a multiplayer survival horror game where you and up to 3 other players try to survive in a zombie-infested Pennsylvania, with 4 game modes to choose from: campaign, versus, survival, and single player. There are 5 zombie types you have to fight against. The boomer, shut up, don't you dare say it, a, for lack of a better term, fat zombie that explodes when you kill it. There's also the hunter, a fast zombie, the smoker, a weird zombie, the tank, which its description is in the name, and the witch, a witchy zombie. The game received universal praise for its masterful capture of tension and suspense in the fun multiplayer zombie world. The game promptly got a sequel the next year, which is basically the same but with improved graphics and more game modes. I haven't played either of the Left 4 Dead games, please don't bully me. Then, in 2011... both mine and Gabe Newell's favourite Valve game, Portal 2 is the amazing sequel to the intensely entertaining puzzle game Portal. One of the few complaints people had about the first game is how short it was. Heck, I was able to beat it in only an hour, which for most games is extremely short. Portal 2 has no such problems, as the sequel is around 6 hours long, and although this is still relatively short, it keeps you captivated every second of playing. The game's graphics are stunning, light years ahead of any game from the early 2010s. The level of detail on every little object is needlessly astounding, creating a huge sense of immersion never broken throughout. The game is just as fun and satisfying as ever, with a myriad of new kind of puzzles, ranging from soaring the skies via aerial faith plates, to zooming through portals like Sonic thanks to Speed Gel. The variety of level design is astonishing, and yet every single puzzle is piles of fun to solve. The story is another marvel. This time, the game stars cute little robot Wheatley, voiced by Stephen Merchant, known for his roles in Logan and the British version of The Office. Merchant's performance is remarkable. You often forget that Wheatley isn't a real person. Wheatley is introduced as this charming, funny, but not the brightest little robot friend to Chell, your character. You then dive headfirst into what is, according to the robot on the wall, Aperture Science 50,000 years after the first game.
Good morning. You have been in suspension for 9.
And as soon as Wheatley leaves you, you realise how alone the place feels. There's almost a nostalgic theme to it, but it's completely overshadowed by how eerie and unsettling the area is. The supposedly world-class research facility is now completely broken down, nature has taken over and it all feels just wrong. This tension gradually builds up until eventually you run into the evil robot from the first game, GLaDOS. Wheatley's daftness causes him to reactivate her, and she puts you through tests again while Wheatley tries to get you out. Eventually he succeeds, and you manage to sabotage both the turret production line and the neurotoxin generator, essentially unarming GLaDOS. Wheatley then takes control of the facility, but then he turns evil, and he turns GLaDOS into a potato. Yes, I know, and throws you and her down a tunnel.
Oh, hi. So, how are you holding up? Because I'm a potato. Oh, good. My slow clap processor made it into this thing, so we have that.
You then wake up in Old Aperture, and this is in my opinion the best part of the game. It gives you this feeling of anxiety, as you are literally in the deep dark underbelly of Aperture Science, what appears on the surface to be a state-of-the-art research facility. The mix of the ominous music and sound effects, the rusty decrepit aesthetic of the expectedly classy 60s style section of Aperture, and the darkness that surrounds you everywhere you go, combine to create a cautious but curious sensation, creating an atmosphere of both tension and peculiarity that never ceases. The recordings of Aperture CEO, Cave Johnson, voiced by J.K. Simmons, only amplify this feeling.
Welcome, gentlemen, to Aperture Science. Astronauts, war heroes, Olympians, you're here because we want the best, and you are it. So, who is ready to make some science?
I am.
Now, you already met one another on the limo ride over, so let me introduce myself. I'm Cave Johnson. I own the place.
Humor is another thing that, although subtle, makes me love this game even more.
Alright, I've been thinking. When life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade.
Yeah.
Make life take the lemons back.
Yeah.
Get mad!
Yeah.
I don't want your damn lemons! What am I supposed to do with these?
Yeah, take the lemons.
Demand to see life's manager.
Yeah.
Make life rue the day it thought it could give Cave Johnson lemons. Do you know who I am? I'm the man who's gonna burn your house down with the lemons.
Oh, I like this guy.
I'm gonna get my engineers to invent a combustible lemon that burns your house down.
Burn his house down. Burning people. He says what we're all thinking.
You then make your way back up to the top of the facility, and find out that Wheatley, because of his stupidity, is causing the facility to self-destruct, and you have to make your way through Wheatley's dilapidated test chambers, at times that are even made on the spot, and then make your way to Wheatley and stop him. One quick side note that I have to mention, in Wheatley's test chambers, he has screens with his face on, and if you smash all of them, he says this.
They're not even your screens to break! It's vandalism! It's pure vandalism! You wouldn't do that if this was your house, would you? If I came around your house, smashing your telly to bits, you'd be furious, and rightly so! Unbelievable! Right, you know what, Mike? Okay, I'll take that as a no then. Fine, well, may the best man win. Sphere, may the best sphere win. Swap that in. Much more clever. Books.
It's little things like that that fully immerse you in the world of Portal. After escaping Wheatley's levels, you then manage to go to his lair, his words, not mine,
Welcome
To my lair.
and fight him before he destroys the facility. How could you possibly beat him? Well, after doing something similar to the boss fight in the first game, Wheatley traps the button to change control of the facility from him back to GLaDOS, and Shell almost dies, but instead of giving up, she does what anyone would do in a similar situation, and portals to the moon. I love this game. The fact that Portal 2 manages to make you feel bad when Cave Johnson is dying, a character only heard through a few voice recordings, is genius. And then there's the co-op mode. Co-op combines the quirky, brilliant voice acting and the challenging but not unreasonable puzzles to create a fun multiplayer experience, which only adds to the game's overall entertainment. And finally, the community test chambers. Portal 2 uses the Steam Workshop to allow users to create their own test chambers and share them with the world, allowing anyone to play them. And with over 500,000 community test chambers created, this has allowed the Portal 2 community to stay well alive into today. A year later, Valve released the game that calls this guy to his pants.
Stop, I've got a butterfly knife. I've got a butterfly knife. That has got to be worth like $400. I think I just actually myself. Why does this always happen?
Counter-Strike Global Offensive. If you are by any definition of the word a gamer, you will have without a doubt played this game. I don't think I even need to explain it, but I'm going to anyway, because f*** you. CSGO was a culmination of over a decade of trial and error and experimenting with what works in the multiplayer FPS genre, and Valve got pretty good at it. Around the time, most games in the genre had the same formula. There's a bunch of people on each team and you have to kill each other, and whoever gets the most kills wins. Many players complained that after a while, this formula got pretty boring and led to players losing enthusiasm for FPS games. CSGO added 5v5 competitive mode, the difference being that when you die, you don't respawn until the next round starts. This added an intensely increased sense of competition, hence the name of the mode. This singled out CSGO as a much more intense and thrilling experience compared to all the other FPS games that were essentially carbon copies of each other. Another aspect of CSGO's success is that it's not biased against new players. Everyone, no matter their in-game level, has access to the same guns, and thus the only way to get an advantage is through skill. This was in direct opposition to how FPS games at the time functioned, as in those games high-level players had access to stronger weapons, and much more of them. There's also a cosmetic side to the game, which although I don't care that much about, some people do.
I've got a butterfly enough net!
The cosmetics aspect is basically a progression system that also isn't a progression system. Many players will, no matter how fun your game is, eventually get bored of playing. That is, unless they have something to work towards. Apart from leveling up, the next best thing to look forward to was getting a cool gun. And it worked. Valve had struck gold. The addition of cosmetics transformed CSGO from a good game to one of the best. And although Valve attempted a few sequels, none of them even came close to the level of success as Global Offensive. After 4 years of development, Dota 2 was released in 2013. Dota 2 is a multiplayer online battle arena, or MOBA game. MOBAs are a subgenre of strategy games, where each player controls a character in a team. Each team controls one half of the map, and the objective is to destroy the enemy team's base and take over their half of the map. Another key factor is leveling up. This is usually done by killing AI enemies scattered over the map in order to upgrade your character's weapons and equipment. Winning the game depends on the ability of players to be able to juggle multiple tasks, such as collecting resources, powering up faster than the enemy, but also being able to strategize efficiently with your team. Dota 2 is particularly successful because of its strictly anti-pay-to-win design that Valve is known for. Valve even decided to make the game completely free, and as soon as you complete the tutorial, you have access to all 100 plus characters to choose from. Its success also derives from the extremely in-depth and well-balanced characters and gameplay. You can tell Valve put a lot of time and effort into the game. And then, after 3 years of radio silence, technically 2, but I mean, come on. In association with HTC, Valve released the HTC Vive, the first virtual reality headset that allowed you to walk around and physically interact with virtual worlds. Not only this, but it had one of the most high quality lenses, that being 1080 by 1200 pixels per eye. This level of motion tracking revolutionized the VR industry, as almost every single headset that came after it included physical interaction with the VR world. And although it was very expensive, £1,000 total for the headset controllers and sensors, it was extremely innovative and almost worth the cost. Although the resolution for the lenses was very high-end for the time, games were still noticeably pixelated, and for people who suffer from motion sickness, borderline unplayable. Valve also released The Lab, the first game to use the Source 2 engine. The Lab was a VR game set in the Portal universe with 9 mini-games to play, and although mildly entertaining, it was clear Valve was merely testing the waters. In 2018, Valve released Artifact, an online card trading game based on Dota 2. The idea was that Valve wanted to do the same thing with card trading games as they did with Half-Life, make a game that redefined the genre and became synonymous with it. However, this was coming from a video game developer, and as you can imagine, gamers aren't really fans of online trading card games. They're just not entertaining to us. Artifact did so badly that within 2 months of release, it saw a 95% decrease in player count. By May the next year, so few people cared about Artifact that Twitch's category for the game started being used to stream porn. That's a real thing. Valve was in some real deep water, but all that was about to change. After over a decade of silence on the issue, Valve announced that they were working on a new Half-Life title, set to be released early 2020. Many fans of the series were both overjoyed at the news of a new Half-Life game, but disappointed that it was not the sequel everyone was expecting. And on the 23rd of March 2020, Valve held their breaths. Did they do a good job? Did they manage to live up to the impossible amount of hype surrounding the game? Did they make not just a good first-person shooter, but a good virtual reality first-person shooter? Fuck yeah. After learning how to make a good VR headset from HTC, Valve decided to take matters into their own hands, and in mid-2019 released the Valve Index, a stunning improvement from the Vive. The Index had 2 cameras instead of 1, leading to much better motion tracking. It had near double the resolution on each lens, the refresh rate was much smoother, and the headset was much lighter than the Vive, all for the same price. All of these factors combined officially made the Index the best headset on the market, and by a long shot. But that wouldn't matter if there weren't any games to play apart from Cooking Simulator. There weren't any VR games that really made the purchase worth it. That is, until Half-Life Alyx. There are so many reasons Alyx became the game to get VR for. The game looks beautiful, fully taking advantage of the Source 2 engine, and thanks to the improved lenses on the Index, players could now fully appreciate the stunning vistas the game had to offer, which added a huge layer of immersion, something especially important in virtual reality games. Subtleties are something Valve is well known for, and Alyx is no different. Say you pick up a bottle and drop it. It smashes. You then pick up another bottle and start shaking it. The liquid inside shakes with it. Although little details like that may seem pointless, if you pick up a bottle and throw it, and it was indestructible, it would completely destroy the illusion that you are actually in the world of Half-Life. And Valve knows this. Heck, there's a working piano and whiteboard in the game. Valve could have easily gotten away with not adding any of these seemingly insignificant features, but the fact that they added them despite the knowledge that most players would not realise the effort they made to implement them, shows how much Valve really cares about its player base and making good games. Alyx has set a new precedent for VR games. In Alyx, you are able to interact with almost everything. Food cans that you can't do anything with? Yep. These walls? Yes sir, instead of your hands magically going through the walls and other objects like in most VR games. In Alyx, the walls are actually physical things, which is a cherry on the cake for immersion. And thanks to this game, other VR titles will be expected to live up to the quality of Alyx, which means there will only be better VR games to come. The gameplay is unique and clever, and has 2 main aspects, combat and puzzle. The combat is simple yet effective. There are 3 weapons in the game, the pistol, shotgun and the SMG, 5 if you count the 2 grenade types. Although this may seem like a small number, we are given the ability to upgrade your weapons with upgrades such as autoloader and laser sight. Each upgrade costs resin, a material found scattered around the map in both obvious and hidden areas. The game rewards you for looking into every nook and cranny, as if you do you will find more resin, which allows you to purchase more useful upgrades. Laser sight is the most expensive upgrade at 35 resin, but once you've unlocked it, you won't have to worry about wasting ammo when missing shots anymore. Especially if you play normally. Essentially, if you play normally, combat will be at normal difficulty, and if you play the game thoroughly, you are rewarded with easier combat. The combat itself is very gratifying, as the mix of the pristine sound and visual effects, plus the fact that you are in VR, brings the game to a whole new level of immersion, making you shit your pants when you run out of ammo. The way the game deals with this is to spawn ammo nearby. It took me 30 minutes and a YouTube tutorial to figure that out. The puzzle side of the game is another enjoyable aspect. There are environmental puzzles, where you have to figure out where to go next, hinted at by visual clues such as blocked off doorways in areas with ammo. At times you have to actually interact with and change the environment. For example, at one point you have to get inside a building. The door is locked, but there is an open window that you can't reach. The way you get inside is by pulling the zombie hanging out of the window out first, and then bring the crate under the window to climb on top of and through the window. The fact that not every place you have to go to is an open doorway waiting for you to walk inside is all the more engaging, as it wouldn't be like that in real life. The atmosphere of the game is spot on. When Valve wants you to feel scared, you do. Oh fuck. Oh fuck. This is done with subtle cues, such as no other paths being available, so you are forced to go into a dark, mysterious room. And the guy who's supposed to be your advisor to help you find your way gets disconnected, making you feel alone in a world with aliens, zombies, and whatever's in that room. The ending is what turns this game from a great game to a Half-Life game. For context, Alyx takes place 5 years before Half-Life 2. Throughout the game, you have been made to believe that Gordon Freeman is trapped in Nova Prospect, the compound prison, until you eventually make your way to the prison chamber. It's not Freeman. It's the G-Man. He allows Alyx to save her future dad's life, in exchange for being placed under the G-Man's services. This directly changes the ending of episode 2, where just before everyone is leaving to find out what happened to the Borealis, Eli Vance, Alyx's dad, is killed. The game lets you pick up the crowbar as Gordon, Eli promising he'll get revenge on the G-Man, before fading to the title screen. This effectively announced to the world that Half-Life 3 was on its way. Let's just hope Valve delivers yet another miracle. Here's to Half-Life 3. Oh, well, 1 week of scriptwriting and 2 weeks of editing later, I have finally finished this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, consider subscribing to support the channel. It's free, and you can always unsubscribe later if you want to. Goodbye!